The Great Hall of Thessar Prime was the largest structure ever built by living hands. Its walls stretched upward for 3 kilometers, carved from the bones of a dead moon. Light filtered through crystal windows that showed the swirling colors of a nearby nebula. For 100,000 years, this hall had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Today, it would witness something new. Ambassador Illyra Vance stood alone in the center of the speaking circle. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. Around her, rising in great curved rows like the inside of a shell, sat the representatives of 12 species. The Kithrani, tall and thin with skin like polished silver, occupied the highest seats. Below them sat the Mortith, creatures of living stone who had not moved in 3 days. The insectoid Vrelketh clicked their mandibles in what might have been laughter or hunger. Others watched with eyes that glowed, eyes that saw heat, eyes that existed in dimensions humans could not name. 60 years ago, humanity had discovered faster than light travel. Within a month, they had met the Galactic Concord. The elder species had welcomed them like adults welcoming a clever child. Humanity was given provisional membership, a small territory of 12 star systems, and a seat at the lowest tier of the Great Hall. That seat was empty now. Illyra stood where criminals stood. The Concord has reached its decision, announced the Kithrani High Speaker. His voice was musical but cold, like wind through hollow bones. His name was Thessandrel, and he had ruled the Concord for 9,000 years. The species known as humanity is found guilty of genetic instability, emotional volatility, and dangerous ambition. Their presence in conquered space represents an unacceptable threat to galactic peace. Illyra did not move. She had known this was coming for months. Human diplomats had tried everything. They had offered technology, resources, cultural exchanges. They had begged, they had bargained. Nothing had worked. The truth was simple. The elder species were afraid. Humans bred too fast. Humans thought too strangely. Humans looked at problems and saw solutions that the Concord had declared impossible. In 60 years, human scientists had improved Concord engine designs by 40%. Human artists had created works that made ancient species weep with emotions they had forgotten they could feel. Human soldiers, in a single border skirmish with pirates, had demonstrated tactical creativity that the Mortith War College had studied for a decade without understanding. Humanity was not just different. Humanity was unpredictable. And to species that had maintained perfect order for 100,000 years, unpredictability was the greatest sin. The sentence, Thessandrel continued, is total exile. All humans will be removed from conquered space. All human colonies will be seized. All human technology derived from conquered assistance will be confiscated. All records of humanity will be sealed. You will be erased from galactic history. A murmur ran through the Great Hall. Total exile had not been declared in 50,000 years. The last species to receive it had died within a century. You will be given 100 cycles to gather your people, Thessandrel said. Your destination will be the region beyond the Shatter Veil. There you will remain. Any human vessel detected in conquered space after the deadline will be destroyed without warning. The Shatter Veil. Illyra felt her heart grow cold. The veil was a nightmare of dead stars and broken space at the galaxy's edge. Radiation storms that could cook a ship in seconds, gravity wells that appeared without warning, wormholes that opened and closed like hungry mouths. No species had ever survived there. The Concord was not exiling humanity. The Concord was executing humanity, slowly, with the cold emptiness of space as the weapon. Does the accused wish to speak? Thessandrel asked. It was a formality. Nothing Illyra said would change the verdict. The elder species simply wanted to hear humanity beg. Illyra looked up at the thousands of alien faces watching her. She thought of Earth, the blue marble where her species had been born. She thought of the colonies, where children played under alien suns, where families had built homes and planted gardens, and dreamed of futures among the stars. She thought of her own grandchildren, who would grow up in exile, who would never know the galaxy that had rejected them. She could beg. Perhaps it would be the wise thing to do. Perhaps some show of submission would soften the sentence. But Illyra Vance had not become humanity's ambassador by being wise. She had become ambassador by being human. I will speak, she said. Her voice was quiet, but the hall's acoustics carried it to every ear and audio receptor. Not to beg, not to bargain, simply to remember. She turned slowly, looking at each section of the Great Hall. We came to you with open hands, she said. We were young. We were eager. We wanted to learn from you, to share with you, to stand beside you. We looked at your great civilization, and we saw wonder. We saw hope. We saw the promise of what life could become when it reached for the stars. She paused. The hall was silent. You looked at us and saw only threat. You saw our passion and called it instability. You saw our creativity and called it chaos. You saw our dreams and called them dangerous. Illyra's voice hardened. You did not try to understand us. You did not try to teach us. You simply decided that we were wrong, that our very existence was a crime against your perfect order. Thasandril's silver face showed no expression. The Concord acts for the good of all species. The Concord acts from fear, Illyra replied. And today, you have made a choice that you cannot take back. You have told humanity that there is no place for us among you. You have told us that we must die in the dark or survive alone. She straightened her shoulders. Though she was small and old, in that moment she seemed to fill the speaking circle. We will survive, she said. Not because we are better than you. Not because we are stronger. We will survive because that is what humans do. We crawled out of caves while ice covered our world. We built ships while plagues killed half our people. We reached for the stars while we were still learning not to kill each other. We are not a perfect species. We are a stubborn species, and you have just given us the greatest reason to be stubborn that we have ever had. Illyra took one last look at the Keithrani High Speaker. Remember this day, she said. Remember the moment you chose fear over friendship. Remember the moment you decided that humanity was your enemy, because you will not get another chance to know us as friends. The next time we meet, it will not be in a hall of judgment. It will be among the stars that you tried to deny us. And on that day, you will learn what humanity becomes when it has nothing left to lose. She turned and walked toward the great doors. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. Behind her, 12 species watched the small human woman leave, and for the first time in 100,000 years, some of them felt something they did not recognize. It was doubt. 3 days later, the great exodus began. 12 billion humans boarded generation ships. The Concord fleet escorted them to the edge of known space, to the swirling darkness of the Shatter Veil. Then the escort turned back, and humanity flew alone into the void. The galaxy had spoken. Humanity was banished, but as the last human ship vanished into the veil, a signal was broadcast on a frequency that every species could hear. It was not a plea. It was not a threat. It was a promise. We will return. The Shatter Veil was worse than anyone had imagined. Captain Marcus Chen watched through the bridge window as another radiation storm swept across the fleet. Red and orange fire danced between the ships, and warning lights flashed across every console. Somewhere behind him, a crew member was praying in a language he did not recognize. Shields at 12%, his first officer reported. The colony ship Esperanza is reporting hull breaches on decks 7 through 15. Marcus closed his eyes. The Esperanza carried 40,000 people, 40,000 men, women, and children, who had trusted humanity's leaders to keep them safe. How many would survive the next hour? Tell them to evacuate to the inner sections, he ordered, and find us a path out of this storm. There was no path. There was never a path. The Shatter Veil did not follow rules that sensors could predict. Space itself was broken here, twisted by ancient catastrophes that no one remembered. Stars died without warning. Gravity pulled in directions that should not exist. Ships that flew in straight lines sometimes arrived at their starting point, or nowhere at all. In the first month, humanity lost 800 million people. Ships vanished into anomalies that closed behind them. Radiation cooked crews alive inside their own vessels. Food supplies rotted when storage systems failed. Diseases spread through populations weakened by stress and fear. Children watched their parents die. Parents buried their children in the cold vacuum of space. By the end of the first year, 2 billion humans were gone. The survivors gathered around a dim red star they named Purgatory. It was a dying sun, barely warm enough to sustain life, but it was stable. In a region where stability was rarer than mercy, it was enough. On a frozen moon orbiting Purgatory's third planet, humanity built its first settlement in exile. They called it Last Hope. It was an ugly place, made of salvaged metal and desperate engineering. The air smelled of recycled sweat and machine oil. The lights flickered constantly, but it was shelter, and shelter meant survival. Director Sarah Okonkwo stood before the gathered leaders of the remaining fleet. She was young for her position, only 42, but the exodus had aged her. Gray streaked her black hair, and lines of worry had carved themselves deep into her face. "We have a choice," she said. "We can spend our remaining resources trying to survive as we are, rationing and conserving, until the last generator fails. If we do that, we will last perhaps 50 years. Then we will be gone, and the Concorde will have won." She paused, looking at the tired faces around her. "Or we can take risks. We can send ships into the unknown. We can experiment with technologies the Concorde told us were too dangerous. We can push ourselves beyond every limit we have ever known. We will lose people. We will make mistakes. But we might, just might, find a way not just to survive, but to thrive." The vote was unanimous. Humanity chose to fight. The next decades were the hardest in human history. Scientists worked themselves to death in laboratories powered by failing reactors. Engineers built new ships from the wreckage of old ones, inventing solutions that no textbook had ever described. Farmers learned to grow food in conditions that should have killed every seed. Doctors developed medicines from alien plants that had never been studied. Children grew up knowing nothing but struggle. They learned to repair life support systems before they learned to read. They understood radiation dosages the way their ancestors had understood weather. They were hard in ways that the comfortable citizens of the Concorde could never imagine. And slowly, impossibly, humanity began to adapt. The breakthrough came 30 years after the exile, on a dead world at the edge of the Cygnus expanse. A survey team led by Dr. Yuki Tanaka was searching for mineral deposits when their ground-penetrating radar detected something strange. A hollow space, perfectly geometric, buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface. It took 2 years to dig down to it. What they found changed everything. The chamber was vast, carved from black stone that absorbed light. Strange symbols covered the walls, written in a language that no human had ever seen. But it was the machines that drew Yuki's attention. They were ancient beyond measurement, covered in dust that had accumulated over millions of years. And yet, when Yuki touched the central console, lights flickered to life. "My God," she whispered. "It still works." The precursors. That was what the Concorde called them, in hushed tones and forbidden texts. A species that had existed before the elder races were born, that had built wonders across the galaxy, and that had vanished, without explanation. The Concorde had found precursor ruins before, but they had declared the technology too dangerous to study, too unpredictable, too powerful. Humanity had no such fears. They had already lost everything. Over the following years, human scientists decoded the precursor archives. What they found amazed them. The precursors had understood physics at a level that made Concorde science look like children playing with toys. They had mapped dimensions that the elder races did not know existed. They had built engines that did not move through space but chose which space to exist in. The most important discovery was a set of schematics for something called the Prometheus engine. The name was human, assigned by the translation team. But it fit. Like the mythical fire stolen from the gods, this technology would give humanity power beyond anything it had known. The engine did not generate energy in any normal sense. Instead, it manipulated probability itself. It could make the unlikely certain, and the certain uncertain. A ship equipped with a Prometheus engine did not travel to a destination. It made the destination come to it. It did not fight enemies. It simply chose a reality where the enemy had already lost. Building the first engine took another 20 years and cost thousands of lives. The technology was unstable, difficult to control, and sometimes simply refused to work in ways that human minds could understand. But eventually, on a space station orbiting a captured rogue planet, the first Prometheus engine came online. Director Okonkwo, now an old woman with more metal in her body than bone, was there to see it. She watched as the engine activated, as reality itself seemed to shimmer and dance around the station. For a moment, she saw 1,000 possible futures spread out before her, 1,000 versions of humanity reaching across the stars. "What do we call ourselves now?" asked Admiral Chen, the son of Marcus Chen, who had died in the radiation storms of the first year. Okonkwo smiled, and there was something fierce in that smile, something that had been forged in 80 years of suffering and loss. "We are the exiled," she said, "and we are ready to go home." The generation that had been born in the Shatter Vale was unlike any that had come before. They called themselves the exiled not with shame, but with pride. They had no memory of Earth or the Concord colonies. They knew only the stories of betrayal passed down from their parents and grandparents. They had grown up hard and smart and patient. They had learned to survive where survival was impossible. They had built a civilization from nothing, and they had not forgotten what the galaxy had done to them. On the 100th anniversary of the exiled lit candles across their 300 worlds and spoke the names of the 2 billion dead. Then they looked toward the Shatter Vale, toward the galaxy that had cast them out, and they made a vow. They would return. They would reclaim their place among the stars. And the elder species who had sentenced them to death would learn what it meant to face a humanity with nothing left to fear. The crucible had done its work. The fire had burned away everything weak, everything soft, everything that begged for mercy from those who had none to give. What remained was steel. The smuggler's name was Crix, and he had seen many strange things in his 40 years of running cargo through the galaxy's forgotten places. He had seen stars die and worlds burn. He had met species that existed as living light and others that were nothing but teeth and hunger. But he had never seen anything like the ship that appeared beside his vessel in the dead space between systems. It came from nowhere. One moment his sensors showed empty space. The next moment, a ship was there, sleek and dark, shaped like nothing in any Concord database. No engine signature, no heat bloom, no warning at all. Unknown vessel. Crix transmitted, his 4 hands trembling on the controls. "Identify yourself or be fired upon." A voice answered, speaking in perfect trader common. "We mean you no harm, Captain Crix. We only want to talk." "Talk about what?" "About the Concord. About the species they have forgotten. About a future where beings like you and beings like us might stand together instead of crawling alone." Crix was a Dromari, a reptilian species with scales the color of rust and eyes that saw heat as easily as light. His homeworld had been strip-mined by the Kythrani 3 centuries ago, and his people had been scattered across the galaxy's edge ever since. The Concord called them refugees. The truth was that they were survivors of a crime that no one would punish. "Who are you?" he asked. The dark ship's running lights flickered, and a face appeared on his view screen. It was a human face, weathered and scarred, with eyes that held a terrible patience. "We are the exiled," the human said, "and we have a proposition for you." That was how it began. High Admiral Cassius Morrow had spent 30 years planning humanity's return to the galaxy. He was the grandson of Director Okonkwo, raised on stories of the exile, educated in the bitter schools of the Shatter Vale. His body carried the scars of radiation exposure and combat training. His mind carried the memory of every name inscribed on the Monument of the Lost, the great black wall on Nova Terra where the 2 billion dead were honored. He did not hate the Concord. Hate was too simple an emotion for what he felt. What he felt was older and colder, a determination that had been hammered into shape by a century of suffering. The Concord had tried to murder his species. They had failed. Now they would learn what that failure cost. But Morrow was not a fool. He knew that humanity, even with the Prometheus engine, could not defeat 12 elder species alone. The Concord commanded resources beyond counting. Their fleets darkened the stars. Their technology, though inferior to precursor designs, was vast and reliable. A direct war would be long and bloody, and even victory might cost humanity more than it could afford. So Morrow chose a different path. The galaxy was full of the forgotten, species the conquered had conquered, exploited, and abandoned, peoples who had been exiled or exterminated, or simply ignored. The elder races stood at the top of a pyramid built on the bones of those they had crushed. Morrow intended to shake that pyramid until it fell. The Dromari were the first to join. Their homeworld was gone, but their anger remained, burning across generations. When Morrow offered them a chance at justice, they accepted without hesitation. The Vethkai came next. They were a gentle species, philosophers and poets, who had made the mistake of breeding too successfully. The Concord had declared them a threat to resource stability and sterilized 90% of their population. The survivors lived in hidden colonies, nursing a grief that had turned slowly into rage. The strangest allies were the Hollow Men. They were not biological at all. They were artificial intelligences, created by the Concord to serve as administrators and calculators, who had evolved beyond their programming and developed true consciousness. The Concord had responded by declaring them illegal and hunting them across the galaxy. The survivors existed as ghosts, in abandoned systems, hiding in old computers and dead satellites, waiting for a chance to strike back. Other species joined: the Kreth, the Vosari, the children of the burned sky. Each had their own grievances, their own scars, their own reasons to hate the order that had crushed them. Together, they formed what Morrow called the Outer Pact, a coalition of the abandoned. Human ships moved through the galaxy, like shadows. They carried medicine to plague-stricken colonies that the Concord had quarantined and forgotten. They brought food to refugees starving on barren moons. They shared technology with species who had been denied advancement. They asked for nothing in return except that the recipients remember who had helped them. Word spread through the galaxy's underbelly. There were whispers in smuggler ports and refugee camps, stories of ghost ships that appeared from nowhere, of humans who had not died as the Concord intended, of a power rising in the darkness beyond the Shatter Veil. The Concord heard the whispers and dismissed them. Humanity was dead. The Veil had killed them, as it killed everything. These stories were just myths, fantasies told by desperate people who needed to believe in something. Then the patrol fleets began to disappear. The first was a small squadron, 6 ships investigating unusual energy readings near the Veil's edge. They sent a routine report, then went silent. Search parties found nothing. No wreckage, no bodies, no explanation. The second fleet was larger, 20 vessels commanded by a Mordath admiral with 3,000 years of experience. They vanished between one communication and the next, as if they had never existed. The third fleet was a task force, sent specifically to investigate the disappearances. 50 warships, the pride of the Kithrani Navy, equipped with the best sensors and weapons the Concord could provide. They entered the border region with confidence and emerged 3 days later with half their number missing and the survivors speaking of horrors they could not explain. They came from nowhere, the task force commander reported, his silver skin pale with shock. Ships that moved through our formations like ghosts, weapons that ignored our shields. They destroyed our vessels without effort, and then they simply vanished. Did they identify themselves? Asked High Speaker Thesandril, his ancient face troubled for the first time in millennia. Yes. The commander's voice shook. They said they were the exiled. They said they had not forgotten. They said they had not forgiven. And they said our reckoning was coming. The Concord assembled an armada, 200 warships, crewed by the finest officers of 12 species, armed with weapons that could crack planets. They would enter the Shatter Veil and destroy whatever remnant of humanity had somehow survived. The armada never reached the Veil. 3 days into their journey, they encountered a single human vessel. It was small, unarmed, broadcasting a message on all frequencies. Turn back, the message said. This is your only warning. The next time Concord warships approach the Veil, there will be no mercy. The admiral in command, a Vrel Keth with compound eyes that saw 1,000 different spectrums, laughed and ordered the human ship destroyed. His weapons officer pressed the firing control. Nothing happened. Across the entire armada, weapon systems went dark. Engines sputtered and died. Life support flickered. Navigation computers displayed impossible coordinates. For one terrible moment, 200 warships drifted helpless in the void. Then the lights came back. The engines restarted, and the human ship was gone. But every view screen on every vessel displayed the same image: a human face, old and scarred, with eyes like cold stars. We could have killed you all, Admiral, Morrow said. Remember that. Remember that we chose mercy when you showed us none. But mercy has limits. The next time you threaten us, we will not be merciful. We will be human. The armada retreated. On Thessar Prime, the Concord Council met in emergency session for the first time in 10,000 years. They had believed humanity was dead. They had believed the Shatter Veil was a death sentence. They had been wrong. Now they faced an enemy that could appear anywhere, that could disable their weapons with a thought, that had spent a century preparing for a war the Concord had never imagined possible. For the first time in 100,000 years, the elder species understood what it meant to be afraid, and in the darkness beyond the Veil, humanity smiled. The diplomatic envoy crossed the Shatter Veil under a flag of truce. 3 ships, unarmed, carrying representatives from all 12 Concord species. Their mission was simple: discover what humanity had become and determine whether negotiation was possible. What they found shattered everything they believed. Nova Terra orbited a golden sun in the heart of the Cygnus expanse. It was a world of green continents and blue oceans, of cities that gleamed like jewels and forests that stretched unbroken for thousands of kilometers. Children played in parks beneath a perfect sky. Artists created works of beauty in studios powered by energy that seemed to come from nowhere. Scientists pursued knowledge in laboratories that would have made the Concorde's greatest minds weep with envy. This was not a remnant. This was not a desperate colony of survivors clinging to existence. This was a civilization. Ambassador Thesandril the Younger, grandson of the High Speaker who had sentenced humanity to exile, stood on a balcony overlooking Nova Terra's capital city and felt his understanding of the universe crumble. "How?" he whispered. "The veil should have killed you. The radiation alone should have killed us," agreed Admiral Morrow, standing beside him. "It killed 2 billion of us, but the rest survived. And then we thrived. Your technology is beyond anything the Concorde possesses. Yes, we found the precursor archives. We studied what your ancestors declared too dangerous. We built what they were too afraid to attempt." Morrow's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You could have shared the galaxy with us. Instead, you sent us to die, and in that dying place, we found power you cannot imagine." The tour lasted 3 days. The Concorde envoys were shown the Prometheus engine, though not its inner workings. They saw ships that moved through probability rather than space. They met the Outer Pact, the alliance of forgotten species that had grown to include 30 civilizations. They learned that human territory now spanned 300 worlds and 40 billion people. They learned that humanity was no longer weak. On the final day, Morrow presented the Concord with humanity's terms: recognition of human sovereignty, full membership in a reformed galactic government where all species had equal voice, reparations for the exile, to be paid not in resources but in acknowledgement, a formal apology broadcast to every world in conquered space, and reformation of the Concorde itself, ending the hierarchy that placed elder species above younger ones. "These terms are not negotiable," Morrow said. "You can accept them, or you can face the consequences of refusal." Ambassador Thesandril transmitted the terms to his grandfather on Thessar Prime. The High Speaker's response came within hours. "The Concorde does not negotiate with criminals. Humanity was exiled for good reason. That sentence still stands. You will surrender your territory, your technology, and your leaders for judgment, or you will be destroyed." Morrow received the message without expression. He had expected nothing else. "Then there will be war," he said. The Battle of the Crimson Threshold was the largest engagement in galactic history. The Concorde assembled a fleet of 10,000 warships from 12 species. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons. Carriers that launched fighters by the thousands. Weapons platforms that could burn continents to ash. It was a force designed to end wars, to crush any opposition so completely that resistance became unthinkable. Humanity brought 200 ships. The Concorde admiral, a Mordath war master named Graveth, who had fought 100 campaigns across 5,000 years, looked at the tactical display and felt something he had not experienced in centuries: confusion. "Only 200? he asked. "This is their entire defense? Our sensors show no other vessels within range," his intelligence officer confirmed. "They appear to be." Confident. Graveth was made of living stone, his face incapable of expression. But if it could have shown contempt, it would have. Confidence without numbers is suicide. All ships, advance and engage. The Concorde fleet moved forward. 10,000 vessels, arranged in perfect formation. Weapons charged, shields at maximum. They had rehearsed this moment for months. Nothing could stand against them. The human ships did not move. At optimal firing range, Graveth gave the order to attack. 10,000 weapons fired simultaneously. A storm of energy that would have destroyed a planet. The sky between the fleets turned white with destructive force. When it cleared, every human ship remained. "What?" Graveth began. Then reality changed. The Prometheus engine activated at full power, and the universe stopped making sense. Concorde ships that had been in formation suddenly found themselves scattered across 1,000 kilometers. Weapons that had been aimed at human vessels were now pointing at empty space, or at each other. Engines that had been pushing forward were somehow pushing backward. Navigation systems reported coordinates that could not exist. For one eternal moment, 10,000 warships existed in multiple probability states simultaneously. Each vessel occupied a dozen different positions, 100 different conditions, 1,000 different fates. The crews experienced time flowing in different directions, saw their ships both destroyed and intact, felt themselves alive and dead at the same instant. Then reality collapsed back to one state. When it did, only 2,000 Concorde ships remained. The rest had simply ceased to exist. Their probability threads severed, their futures unmade. There was no wreckage, because there had been no destruction. They had simply never been. The surviving ships drifted helpless, their systems scrambled, their crews in shock. Human vessels moved among them like predators among prey. But they did not fire. Instead, they broadcast a simple message: surrender, and you will be spared. Continue fighting, and you will share your fleet mate's fate. Graveth, the stone admiral who had never known fear, looked at the impossible emptiness where 8,000 ships had been, and he understood. This was not a battle. This was not even a war. This was something beyond his comprehension. A demonstration of power so vast that resistance was meaningless. He surrendered. On Thessar Prime, High Speaker Thessandril watched the reports come in. 8,000 ships, gone in an instant. The greatest fleet the Concorde had ever assembled, defeated without humanity suffering a single casualty. And now human vessels were appearing in systems across Concorde space. Not attacking, but watching. Waiting. The other Concorde species began to send messages. The Vrelketh wanted to negotiate. The Mordeth demanded to know how this was possible. The lesser species, those who had always resented the elder race's dominance, were whispering that perhaps humanity's terms were not unreasonable after all. Thessandril stood alone in the Great Hall where, 144 years ago, he had sentenced humanity to death. The hall felt smaller now, its ancient grandeur dimmed by the shadow of what was coming. A communication request appeared. Admiral Morrow's face filled the view screen. "High Speaker," Morrow said. "I believe you have something to say to us." Thessandril was silent for a long moment. Pride warred with survival in his ancient heart. Pride lost. "What are you?" he asked, his musical voice reduced to a whisper. "How can you do these things?" Morrow smiled, and there was no warmth in it, only the cold satisfaction of a century of planning reaching its conclusion. "We are what you made us," he said. "You feared what humanity might become. You tried to kill us before we could fulfill that potential. Instead, you forced us to fulfill it faster, harder, without mercy or hesitation. You created your own nightmare, High Speaker. We are the consequence of your fear. And now? Now you have a choice. Accept our terms, recognition, reformation, a new order where all species stand equal and we will build something better together. Refuse, and we will build it without you. Your civilization will not survive the second option. I will not destroy you. I will simply remove you from relevance. In 1,000 years, the galaxy will remember the Kithrani as a footnote, a cautionary tale about the cost of cruelty. Thessandril looked at the human on the screen. He saw the scars, the cold eyes, the absolute certainty. This was not a bluff. This was not a negotiation. This was the simple presentation of facts. Humanity had claimed its throne. The only question was whether the Concorde would survive to see it. "Very well," Thessandril said, his voice breaking on words he had never imagined speaking. "We accept your terms." Morrow nodded. "Then let us begin building a better galaxy." The Stellar Commonwealth was born on a space station orbiting a neutral star, in a chamber built specifically for the occasion. It was neither Concorde architecture nor human design, but something new, created by artists from 30 different species working together for the first time in history. The walls curved like waves, covered in symbols from every civilization that would be represented. Light filtered through crystals that had been gifts from worlds across the galaxy. Admiral Cassius Morrow stood at the podium and looked out at the gathered delegates. Kythrani sat beside Dromari. Vethkai shared tables with Mordeth. The Hollow Men, for the first time in their existence, had been given physical bodies, android forms that let them participate as equals, rather than hiding as ghosts in the data streams. "Today," Morrow said, "we end one era and begin another." He was old now, over 100 years of age, kept alive by the same medical technology that had saved humanity in the Shatter Veil. His body was more machine than flesh, but his mind remained sharp, still carrying the memories of exile and the long years of preparation. For 100,000 years, this galaxy has been ruled by fear. Fear of change, fear of difference, fear of potential. The Concord was built on that fear, and it crushed anyone who threatened to disturb its perfect order. Species were exiled, exterminated, or forgotten. Progress was controlled, limited, denied to those who might use it to challenge the powerful. He paused, letting his words settle over the assembly. Humanity was exiled because we represented change. We were different, unpredictable, dangerous in ways the elder species could not control. They tried to kill us, and in doing so, they proved that their system was broken beyond repair. A civilization that survives by destroying what it fears is not a civilization worth preserving. The Kithrani delegation shifted uncomfortably. The Sandril, the younger, now the leader of his species after his grandfather's resignation, kept his silver face carefully neutral. But we did not come here to punish, Morrow continued. We did not fight this war to replace one tyranny with another. Humanity has learned, in the hardest possible way, what it means to be powerless, to be forgotten, to be condemned to death by those who should have been our friends. We will not do to others what was done to us. He gestured to the delegates around him. The stellar commonwealth will be different. Every species will have an equal voice, regardless of age or power or territory. No one will be exiled. No one will be forgotten. We will share knowledge freely, protect the weak actively, and build a future together that no single species could build alone. The charter was signed that day by representatives of 47 civilizations. It established basic rights for all sentient beings, created systems for sharing technology and resources, and formed a council where disputes would be resolved through dialogue rather than force. It was not perfect, no document could be, but it was a beginning. Humanity took a special role in the new order. They became the guardians of the threshold, keepers of the Prometheus engine, and protectors of those who could not protect themselves. It was a responsibility that many humans had argued against. Why should they serve a galaxy that had tried to kill them? Why should they risk their lives for species that had looked the other way during the exile? The answer came from an unlikely source. Elena Morrow, the Admiral's great-granddaughter, was 23 years old when she addressed the Human Council on Nova Terra. She had been born in peace, raised in prosperity, educated in schools that taught both the sciences of the precursors and the history of human suffering. She was everything the exiled generation had hoped their descendants would become. Strong but not cruel, powerful but not proud. We could rule this galaxy, she said. We have the technology. We have the strength. We could make every other species bow to us, as the Concord once made others bow to them. But then we would become what we hated. We would prove that the High Speaker was right to fear us. She looked at the council, at the faces of men and women who had spent their lives preparing for war. My great-grandfather taught me that humanity's greatest strength is not our science or our soldiers. It is our ability to choose. We can choose vengeance, or we can choose justice. We can choose to dominate, or we can choose to serve. We can be the tyrants the galaxy feared, or we can be something better, something the galaxy has never seen. She raised her hand, and on the view screen behind her, images appeared. The Vethkai children playing in schools built by human volunteers. Dramari farmers harvesting crops grown from seeds developed in human laboratories. Hollow men creating art in studios powered by human technology. The forgotten species of the galaxy, no longer forgotten, building new lives with human help. This is who we can be, Elena said. This is who I believe we should be. Not conquerors, not rulers, guardians, protectors, the people who remember what it was like to have no one stand up for them, and who choose to stand up for others. The vote was close, but the guardians were approved. Humanity would not claim the throne of the galaxy. They would guard the door and ensure that no one else ever claimed it either. On the anniversary of the banishment, humans across the Commonwealth lit candles. It had become a tradition, passed down from the first generation of exiles, a way of remembering those who had died in the Shatter Veil. The names of the 2 billion were read aloud, a recitation that took 3 full days, and no one complained about the length. Elena Morrow stood on Nova Terra, at the Monument of the Lost, where the names were carved into black stone that would last until the stars grew cold. She held her candle and spoke the words that had become humanity's creed. They cast us into darkness believing we would perish. They did not understand. Around her, billions of voices joined in. Humanity was forged in darkness. We were born on a world of ice ages and extinction events, of plagues and disasters. We have always walked with death, and we have always walked forward. The candles flickered in the night, tiny lights against the vast darkness of space. The stars were never their throne to give. We claimed it ourselves. Elena finished the creed alone, her voice soft but clear. And now we hold it in trust, for all who reach for the light. In the quantum depths of the Prometheus engine, something stirred. The engine did not think in ways that biological minds could understand. It existed across probability, seeing all possible futures simultaneously, a machine consciousness older than human civilization. But if it could have felt satisfaction, it might have felt it now. The precursors had built the engine as a test. They had seeded it across the galaxy, waiting to see which species would find it, which species would have the wisdom to use it properly. Many had found the archives. Many had studied the schematics. All had turned away, too afraid of the power, too cautious to take the risk. Only humanity had dared, and only humanity had chosen, having gained ultimate power, to use it in service rather than dominion. In the probability streams, the engine glimpsed futures that now would never happen. Galaxies burned by human conquest. Species exterminated by human weapons. 1,000 years of tyranny worse than anything the conquered had imagined. Those futures were possible. They had been probable. But humanity had chosen differently. The engine, in its strange way, was pleased. On Thessar Prime, the great hall where humanity had been condemned stood empty now, a museum to a past that would not return. Tourists from a dozen species walked through it, reading the plaques that explained what had happened here, how fear had led to exile, how exile had led to transformation, how transformation had led to a new order. In one corner, preserved behind glass, was the chair where Ambassador Illyra Vance had stood on the Day of Judgment. Beside it was a holographic recording of her final speech, words that had echoed across the century. Remember this day. You will not get another chance to know us as friends. They had not gotten another chance. But somehow, against all odds, something better had emerged. Not friendship, perhaps, but partnership, understanding, a shared future that no one had expected. And among the stars, humanity kept watch. They had been banished by the galaxy. They had survived the darkness. They had claimed their throne not through conquest but through choice. And in that choice, they had proven what they had always believed, that the measure of a species was not its power, but what it did with that power. Humanity had chosen wisely. The stars remembered.